Just a tour of my garden. Here's the miscellaneous bed, root vegetables, potatoes. Just doing some weeding here. Beans and peas and brassica section. I'll go in closer for some other things. Transplanted my ground cherries late and their roots were bound, so they seem to be recovering. I'm not sure if they'll make abundant crop of ground cherries, but it looks like there's a little teeny one here. They're usually very, very abundant and prolific, I guess you call it, when they're treated properly. My kale's doing pretty good. All of my cabbage plants were nipped off early before I planted them, but I've noticed I like this particular late season or long season cabbage because it came back with one head again, whereas this other variety here came back with not quite so well, with two heads, and so I'm gonna stick with this variety because it rebounded very nicely. I noticed that I have some bok choy coming up here, and there's another plant too. Hopefully I'll get some seed. That must have self-seeded itself from 2 years ago, so I think that's a self-seeder. These are the broccoli. They haven't begun producing yet. Like I mentioned, I still have to weed these beans, but some of them came up the first round when I planted them, and then others didn't, so I planted a second round. Those are the smaller ones here. In this container I've got peanuts. It's the only the first year that something hasn't come and got them. I've been protecting them very well. This is turmeric. Here's a zucchini plant that just seeded itself. Same thing with the peas. Some of them came up and some of them didn't, so I got some peas here. Planted some more. And there's smaller ones here. These are chickpea plants. I planted more of them, but only these two came up. I'll have to experiment more with the chickpeas. With potatoes, you hill them up because they produce their potatoes down at the root, so I've hilled these up. I planted turnips in between. I'll have to thin these out. And I planted some more beans on by the potatoes, just to have more space. Looks like I planted some cucumbers there too, beside the potatoes now that they're hilled up. And also the peas. I planted peas here, just to get more peas in. These are the carrots and the beets that I just thinned out and weeded yesterday. And the onions are doing pretty good. Again with the cucumbers, some of them grew the first planting and some of them didn't, so there was more space. And I grew a second planting. Looks like there's more space here that I can start doing some lettuce and radishes. These are a sweet pepper. Not like a bell pepper, but I think they'll probably do quite well here. The tomatoes, there's 2x2 plants of tomatoes. And they look like they're doing pretty good too. Lamb's quarters keeps growing, and I dry as much as I can. Another weed that's pretty prolific here, or I could dry this, I forget what it's called right now. But there's lots of that too that I could have dried, but haven't got time to dry all these. Here's that pink-hearted lamb's quarters that I brought in seed for, and it just keeps on coming back, seeding itself. I want to show at the base of the fence while I can. Here's a stake, a wooden stake that we made to stake that to the ground. And I have these every 10 inches or so, 10 to 12 inches, all the way around. Keep this tight to the ground. And I haven't had any problem with that groundhog, although he's been around. Yep, gonna have some good tomatoes, and garlic. I planted a bunch of stuff like dill pretty late, but it'll still be there. The poppies are coming up. Oh, and corn. I tried to grow more squash, but only one squash plant came up. The vines discourage raccoons from getting at the corn. And this is milk thistle that I've planted on the other side of the corn. You can plant this around the corn because it'll keep out the raccoons as well. It's very prickly. This is grain amaranth. It'll look very nice later on. I planted this barley so that I'd have more seeds for next time around and keep increasing it. Because I'm thinking about making beer. I forget what this is, but it's something that I planted here. I'll have to go back and look at my seed packs. Maggie plant, or some people, well, I forget what it's called, but it's a celery. It's a perennial celery. It keeps coming back. And another one that I really like that comes back is the yellow bed straw. It's past its prime for the yellow, beautiful yellow flowers, but it keeps coming back no matter what happens. And apparently it's medicinal for your kidneys and that. You can use it for dyes, yellow dye and red dye from the roots, and also it curdles milk, which what I got it for. And I'm really liking this raspberry. I don't know what happened to this branch, but this is my early one that produces early. Getting ready to eat some of these. And here's the second round. This is the mid-term. Some of them are almost ready, and then there's a late variety. These are my Siberian pea trees. Each one of these seeds will produce another one, if anyone wants some. They fix nitrogen, and the seeds make great chicken fodder. I've put some pear trees, elderberry, cherry, and I'll find out what this is. Yeah, sea buckhorn. It fixes nitrogen. You need male and female plants. I believe this is the male plant. So the nitrogen fixing will feed and nurse the other plants, the main trees here. These are my hazelnut that I planted this year. This is a Siberian pear that I planted. It goes about 20 feet tall. They say the fruit isn't particularly edible, but it's possible that something can be made. Some kind of ferment, possibly. Back in my root cellar here is a plum tree. It did pretty good, so I bought another one for this area where I'm also planting a food forest. I had a trellis for these hardy kiwi. One there. There's a male and female plant, I believe. I'm not sure. I think so. See, and these like to climb. Funny what happened to this pear tree. I'm not that good at or knowledgeable with pruning yet, and I pruned everything I could. Now I've discovered, I think that the second year the pears will grow, because when I look up here I couldn't reach to prune these, and look at all the pears up there if you can see them. Now a friend of mine said I probably would never have had to prune them in the first place, but I did, so I've got like poodle shaped pear trees. This is a blueberry bush. These three are called chums. Here's one of my apricots from planting this year. I have to cut out this tree and this tree. Here's the other apricot. And once these two trees are cut out, here's my hops. Here's my hops. It's just hanging in there. And I'll train it to go up this tree. The grapes are happening. Even though I don't pay much attention to them. There are several apple trees on the property that were here from a long time ago. This lady's mantle keeps coming back, so it's our survivor, and I could always use that as a nursery plant for propagation if I need to, or if I want to. I'm more into food plants if I'm going to put any energy into it. To me, it should be food, but this is a pretty plant that I got from a cutting, or I got a root from a friend. It's called chlamydia. This is a white one. It looks really nice. It'll keep coming back and climb up here. A friend of mine wanted to give me this barrel with bacteria growing in it. Anyways, yeah, that was spread and sprinkled around the garden to increase the bacteria. Also the sort of mushroom type stuff, there's a bit of that around in the garden as well to keep things growing well. But apparently the cabbages don't like the mushrooms anyway, and but they don't seem to be complaining too much. Brassica also likes flowers and around it, because it doesn't have its own real nice flowers, so when this German chamomile comes up, it self-seeds, and I don't weed that out, and it'll help. Plus, make some good tea. I'm just clearing out an area back here in the shade. I think I might try celery and things like that back here. And just covered over some stinging nettle that I planted here, which makes a lot of useful uses. And it also enriches the soil that it is on, so I'm thinking shade plants for this area soon, maybe next year. Say that potatoes and tomatoes, and I think probably the peppers and the cucumbers and the onions are not something that the groundhog might want to eat. So I'll experiment with growing more that it would eat inside the fencing, and bring these other types that it probably won't eat outside the fencing as I expand the garden. Never did get the marigolds in. I've got some oregano here, some sage, but it's hanging in there for me until I get around to planting it or not. I usually end up with plenty of extra. These are all pretty much stunted by now, I suppose, but the onions could still work maybe, but I think I got enough in the garden for now. This is into July, and I'm just going to mention that the weeding is pretty high maintenance at the beginning, but once this final weeding, not final, but once this weeding is finished, there's less weeding to do as the other plants take over their spot.